welcome to another tutorial video about Civ 6. And in this particular segment, I want to talk about the GUI. The game is incredibly complex. I think for anybody trying to learn Civ 6, there's a lot to look at. And to understand what you're looking at and how the information is passed is kind of key to making it more straightforward to understand. So I think if we go through piece by piece what these various segments look like, it will help any player get to grips with the game. Okay, for starters, the top left, we have a variety of different values. What do they represent? Basically, they represent our resources. There are a variety of different resources in Civ 6 that all help contribute to your overall empire. Okay, so looking at the top bar, first off, we have our science and culture values. Now, we're generating culture, especially as Coupe, because he gets specific abilities, from turn 1 onwards. But you may not see it until you settle your first city, because you need your city to be able to then start researching your capital. Below, of course, we have our science research and our culture research, and it allows you to see how much is being churned out, how much left, how many turns left, how much the boost acquires, whether the boost is going to be eaten up a little bit, like in the case of this one, whereas the full boost would be acquired if we did this, but we're obviously in no position to do so, and so on and so forth. There's the amount of faith you're generating that can be spent on a variety of different units and buildings and all sorts of things. There's your gold and how much money you can spend for a whole bunch of different units and buildings and other sorts of benefits. There's your tourism, which is related to your culture and is more important for culture victories. There is diplomatic favor, which is acquired through a variety of different means, including tribal villages and trading with other civs and so on, that helps you potentially win diplomacy games through Congress and the like. As you open up the game, more and more of these become accessible and visible to you. The same thing goes for your strategic resources, which is horses, iron, niter, and so on. This refers to the amount of envoys, and the cycle is how close you are to getting your next one. Depending on your government, the amount of envoys you'll be getting is at a changed pace, but also a greater return. And this, of course, is the number of traders, both your max capacity, as well as the current traders that are currently en route. Below that, we have the buttons that you can interact with to bring up various panels throughout the game. If you want to see your tech tree, it is easiest done by pressing this button over here and seeing your overall progression, what researches you can currently gain access to, what researches you have boosted but are further away, unknown researches if you are on Civic Tech Shuffle mode like myself, and also ones you completed that you now have access to their benefits from. The same applies for the Civic Tech tree. The third button here is the Government tab. Now this doesn't pop up until you've researched Code of Laws, which is the very first Civic in every single game, no matter who you're playing as. And when you've unlocked this, when you've researched Code of Laws, you gain access to your governments. And every single government starts with the chiefdom government, which earns you 0 diplomatic favor per turn, 1 influence point towards envoys per turn, a military slot, and an economic government slot. Now, of course, certain civs have advantages in this regard, especially at that stage, because they access additional slots or they convert certain slots into other types, like a military slot becomes a wild card, so now you can put 2 economic slot policies in there instead. This is your religion, but again, this only pops up once you receive your pantheon, which is the first aspect to acquiring a religion. These are the Great People post, which show you the various different kinds of great people available to you. It shows you what each specific one grants you in terms of the benefit. It shows each civ's progression towards claiming that particular great person and the amount of cost it would take for you to buy it outright, thus completing the bar for acquiring the great person of your choice. So you can look at it as the bar can be converted either to gold and or faith, depending on how far remaining you need. It also has the previously recruited tab that shows the turn as well as who acquired which great person. Next we have the weather. The weather, especially in a disaster level 4 game like the ones I play, gradually get more and more climate change all the way up to the max throughout the course of the game. And that will of course erode certain tiles on your map. And the reasons why these global climate change effects are happening. Next is your governors panel, which allows you to both employ and reassign and promote particular governors with their own titles. And lastly is the era score timeline. This is really helpful if you want to learn more about the various ways to gain era score to achieve a golden or even a heroic age to progress your game. Next up, a little bit lower in the top left corner, we have the world tracker. This is really useful stuff. Not only because it shows you the relation of boost to overall research and whether you want to hold off on a particular tech or civic in order to be able to gain both of those advantages, but also key-wise, it shows you the option for unit list. Now, the default is that this is turned off because when I press it, you'll see that it is occupying quite a large amount of space. It's quite ugly to have alongside, but on occasions, it can be incredibly useful to know where certain specific things are, especially like a religious game where you don't know where all your apostles are and you don't know which ones have been used and which ones are yet to be used and which ones are yet to move and so on, or when you're looking for a particular great person that you might have been exploring the map with, or so on and so forth. This shows ones that have been rested. That's what the moon tab shows. As you can see, I'm now needing to see that builder. If I wake him up, this same sleep tab, as you can see, is acquired and deselected depending, and shows up here on the unit list. And it shows also what units have yet to be moved versus ones which are exhausted for the turn. It shows me that I also have a couple of traders that are en route. It's a very useful thing to know about that is easily tucked away in this section here that might be forgotten. Worth using when you need to know the information. Moving over to the right top corner of the screen now, you can see that we have the turn order out of the maximum amount of turns depending on the speed of your game. I play on online speed, so the maximum amount of turns I have in a game is 250. You never really reach anything like that. Most games on online speed are probably completed between 150 and 170 turns, maybe even less than that. The time of my local residence. The Civilopedia is a huge one, and this is something that we may well cover in a completely separate tutorial video, because as you can see, there is a whole bunch of things to look at. But basically, if you have a question, this is where you get your answer. And of course, the options menu for the variety of features and other options you can do to either load, save, restart, and other forms of game. Below that, we feature the variety of civs. Now, I've only met one other civ in this game, but it doesn't really matter how many civs you meet for the purpose of our understanding, because each civ will be showing certain values of their economy and of their overall empire. The score value that they have, which only really applies to score victories, but that's only if you finish the last turn, and most games don't last that long unless you're deliberately trying to make it so. Their military strength, their science acquisition, their culture, their gold, their faith, and their diplomacy favor total. This is the relevance and specific to diplomacy games, because this is the cycle and the timer for the next Congress. This only appears, by the way, once you actually get your first Congress. In the turn leading up to your first Congress, this will all of a sudden appear. Prior to that, it's not visible. In fact, we don't have any great works, and one thing I wanted to call back on is that there would be a great work button here, but since I don't have any, even though I have the likes of Mont Saint Michel, which can hold them, and of course my palace, it's not available to you until you acquire the needs to see it. Which honestly I think is not the best way to do things, but I guess it keeps things simpler. Next we have the world rankings. This shows you the variety of different Wincons in the game, as well as who is doing what and how much they are in achieving that. So if it's culture, it shows you the tourism value. If it's domination, it shows you how many capitals that they've dominated. If it's religion, it shows you how many cities they've converted, and so on. Next is the city-states tab. And this tab, again, only appears once you've found your first city-state. You are accruing influence for city-states from the start of the game. And if you don't see a city-state within like 50, 60, 70 turns of a game, the first time you see this tab, you may have already acquired several envoys in your bank to immediately assign to various city-states. The trade routes tab both shows domestic as well as unused and also, of course, foreign international trade routes. Gives a good idea on what you've done, especially in a culture game when you want to make sure that you have one trader to every single other civ in the game. This is a good thing to keep an eye on so that you can keep track on how many routes you've sent to other civilizations. This is your era progress tab. Currently, this game is in the Renaissance era. There's 13 around approximate, it can change, turns to get to the next industrial era. My current score is 78. I'm currently on a golden. I need to get at least 80 by the end of this timer to get back into a normal age for the industrial. If not, I can get up to 91 or more and get into another golden and chain them. The Empire tabs here are incredibly detailed. They show you above and beyond information that you can use to your advantage. And I think the best particular tab for your own progress is the yields. The yields is an incredibly in-depth view of each of your cities, what they're doing, what they have, and how much they have of it. So we see here our cities listed. And underneath each city is the various districts that they own. Within that, they have their own buildings that are listed as well. It also shows you how much production, food, gold, and everything else that the city is currently producing to help sustain and support the city. This really helps you find out, when you have unused trade routes, as I mentioned earlier, which cities you want to be sending them to. As you can see, our cap is relatively, for the scope and time frame of our game, healthy, but some of our other cities, especially ones further down below, enlisted in the order in which you settled them, perhaps need more help. As you can see, this Talmutu, which is the newest city that we've built, only has 8 production, which is less than a third of our cap. If we wish to buy a trader, it's likely that we would want to send them here. We also have our building expenses underneath, of which we have various different districts that are all requiring cost. We have our unit expenses, especially I imagine in a domination game, this may well be a useful area to look at. And we also have our diplomatic deals, which is basically our trades, how long they're lasting, how much we're getting, and so on. We have a variety of resources that we have improved and gained access to, and the amenities and where they're going to, because these are luxuries. We have our city status. This helps us know whether we want to increase the happiness of our particular citizens and which cities need being benefited in that regard. This tab is about gossip and other civs, but really is barely ever used. And finally, we have the resources tab. This not only shows you who has what luxury and the amount of which they have them, this is also pretty useful, especially if you have more information to look at, to decipher certain Congress votes when it comes to duplication or removal of amenities from particular luxury resources. Almost always, the AI will go for no amenities given, the second option over duplication. And often I like to go for ones which are pretty either monopolized heavily or abundant, to try and hope to aim to hit that one for the diplomatic point if I'm interested in a diplomacy game. Anyway, moving to the bottom left corner, which, you know, where my camera operates, and if I was to remove it for a second, you can see that it shows the map. And it shows, generally speaking, in relation to how much you have explored, because the total map size will increase all the way up to the whole world once you've explored enough. In addition, we have a bunch of tabs above here, a bunch of buttons to look at. The lenses is really nice and useful. There are a variety of different ways to look at the map that you are currently viewing. And these are all kind of toggles that are relevant to the map itself, which is why this is basically the map area of the GUI. The other tabs here that we have on top are the map options, the map tags, as you can see we've already used plenty of, the map search, which is really useful in itself if you want to find out who's building a wonder. Bear in mind, this will only show you things you've seen. Sometimes people look up a wonder that they haven't seen, and it may well be being built, but you may not see it because it's from some civilization that we haven't encountered yet, or whatever. So this isn't necessarily completely reliable, simply because we haven't explored everywhere yet. But it is pretty useful otherwise. This is a strange tab, and I don't really know why it exists, but it's a 2D look at the game. Maybe it's for more classic Civ users that makes it easier for them to see things, but otherwise I tend to not bother with that. And this as well is kind of very strange. Kind of shows you the whereabouts of where our civilization is, very much to the east of the map, but generally speaking, I don't know what the purpose of this particularly is. Over to the mid-right, we have a whole bunch of events, trackers, you could call this the events bar, that get added to it as turns progress, as things happen that are in relation to your own empire. So you will see that certain wonders have been completed by other people that we haven't even bothered to try and make. In the past, we tried to make the wonder Apadana in our cap, but unfortunately we were very quickly beaten off of it, so that only 8 production was salvaged. It shows that there were fires going on. We can even see that this tile in particular was burnt, and so it refers to that. And it also shows this, and if we click on this one, it will actually take us directly to the era timeline. And it will write it down in here, and then you can peruse this at your leisure, and then, when done, click the X, and it will no longer exist. All of these can all be removed very simply by just right-clicking on them. And finally, there is a bit of discrepancy. Some people like pressing this where the writing is. I personally would prefer pressing the arrow itself. But either of these tend to press to the next turn. I have noticed on occasions that there have been issues with people trying to press this for next turn because there have been certain units that haven't exhausted their particular movement or actions. So in my view, with that being a caveat for using this only selectively, I would urge people to learn, if they haven't, to click on the arrow instead, because I've never seen this fail, whereas this certainly has its drawbacks. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial look at the various GUI aspects of the game. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you again.